Also this hour.
Today's conclusions on the climate were dramatic.
Our activities today will have a profound impact on society for many generations.
The glaciers, they are melting all over the world. That's something which you really cannot ignore.
We don't know everything about the climate system, but we know enough to be confident that humans are having a significant impact.
The scientists are united like never before. Global warming is happening, and it is, at least partly, our fault. So are you prepared to do even more to help the environment? Will you leave the car on the driveway, turn off the tumble dryer and change what you eat? We've been talking about it all day on 5 Live. Now, this is your chance to have your say on this landmark report on climate change. Has it changed your mind? 0500 909 693 on the phones. The text 85058. Or, of course, you can get in touch on social media at BBC5Live. Plus, indeed, 13 minutes past 10. Scientists say they are 95% sure that humans are responsible for climate change. The UN Climate Panel's latest report warns that sea levels could rise by as much as 82 centimetres. That's nearly 3 feet. And average temperatures could go up by 4.5 degrees by the end of the century. Now, we've been hearing from scientists who've been involved in the report all day here on 5 Live. Here's some of what they've been telling us.
Today's conclusions on the climate were dramatic. The scientists' language was clear.
It should serve as yet another wake-up call that our activities today will have a profound impact on society, not only for us, but for many generations to come.
The atmosphere and ocean have warmed. Snow and ice have diminished. Sea level has risen.
Well, the glaciers, as this report will bring out, they are melting all over the world. And, you know, that's something which you really cannot ignore. It's an important finding in this report.
It's 95% certain, the scientists say, that humans are the dominant cause.
The global patterns will bring changes locally, changes in rainfall, changes in temperature. That has implications for the way that we use and consume energy in the UK and elsewhere.
Global temperatures have gone up by 0.8 degrees over the last 150 years. We've seen sea levels rise faster than the models projected last time around. We've seen the Arctic ice melt faster than was projected last time around.
Climate change in general and sea level rise in particular are going to go on for a very long time. So we really, if we're going to do anything about it, we have to take early action.
We don't know everything about the climate system, but we know enough to be confident that humans are having a significant impact.
It's really a simple question for you tonight. Are you willing to change your lifestyle to do your bit to cut global warming? Or can you not be bothered? Do you not believe in this? And even if you do, you're going to leave it to everybody else. What are you prepared to change? 0500 909 693. The text 85058. Let's pick apart some of the details of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report. That's a big title, isn't it? With Dr. Paul Williams, Royal Society Research Fellow at the University of Reading. Hello, Dr. Paul. Good evening to you.
Hello, Stephen.
Hello there. You were an expert reviewer of part of this report, and Mike Hume is also with us, Professor of Climate and Culture at King's College London. Hello, Mike.
Hello.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Huge body of research then, Paul. In simple terms, what is the evidence that climate change is happening and that we, humans, are causing it?
Well, it's important to realise that there's not just one piece of evidence. I mean, there are literally hundreds, thousands of independent strands of evidence. And that's what scientists look for. It's bad science, really, to take one piece of evidence and draw conclusions from it. But when all these different independent strands of evidence are all pointing in the same direction and telling a consistent story, that's when you start to take it seriously. And that's what we've seen today in the IPCC report. This overwhelming evidence stacking up now about the anthropogenic or human impact on climate.
Spell it out for us, though. Convince us. What is the evidence?
The difficult thing is where to begin. I mean, we've got satellites monitoring the planet for decades now in unprecedented detail. Going back further in time, we've got, temperature records from thermometer readings. You can look at tree rings, you can drill down into ice cores in the Antarctica and Greenland, and at the bottom of the ocean you can drill down, and there's a story to be told about how climate has changed in all of those independent strands of evidence.
And how do we know humans are causing it?
One of the most convincing pieces of evidence is climate models. which are complicated mathematical ways of simulating atmospheric flow and oceanic flow and how the ice is changing. And the simple fact is that if you run a climate simulation of the previous century, but you keep the CO2 levels in the model constant, so you make sure that they don't increase, as we know as they have. But if you keep the CO2 levels constant, then the climate models fail to replicate what we know has happened. And only if you force those climate models with the CO2 increase that we know has occurred, do the climate models have the ability to give us the temperature increase that we know has happened. So there's no other explanation on the table here apart from the CO2 increase as being the cause.
And so, Mike, the evidence is undeniable.
Well, the evidence really hasn't changed very much in the last 5 or 10 years. I mean, there's a certain deja vu for me about this today. If you go back to the fourth assessment report in 2007, very similar statements were being made in that report from the IPCC. So actually, in many ways, there's nothing new that's come out of the studies being reported today. And this, for me, draws attention to a much more uncomfortable reality. And that is that the difficulties of finding policies that can be enacted effectively and appropriately isn't because there's a deficiency of knowledge or that the knowledge is too uncertain. That's not the reason for difficulty and disagreement. The reason that finding policies to reduce human influence on the climate system is a downright political problem. It's because we've got different beliefs and values and ideologies around the world, and we've seen over the last few years how difficult it is to get 190 countries to agree about what to do.
Well, let's see what we're saying at home already about this. Robert's in Belfast, Doug in Rugby, Tony in Bollington. Let's start with Robert. What do you think, Robert?
Good evening, Stephen. That's the first point I got to say to you. It's very simple. It's been proven now by scientists that 95% of global warming is ourselves directly, indirectly involved. I personally believe that the governments around the United Kingdom need to urgently take this on board and introduce severe congestion charges to all cities around the United Kingdom to cut down on the carbon dioxide that comes out of cars.
Well, you're a taxi driver, aren't you?
Yeah, I am.
So what's your part going to be? What are you going to do?
Well, we're part of the public transport system, Stephen. That would be my answer to you on that one.
Mike Hume, what big policy shifts, if you were advising government, would you be telling them have got to be done?
Well, congestion...
Hold on, Robert. Let me just put that question to Mike Hume.
Well, I think we've got to try a different sort of process. I mean, the last 5 or 10 years we've been trying to get this agreement internationally. We tried it at Copenhagen in 2009 and we failed. The next big meeting is in Paris in 2015, and I'm afraid that's going to fail as well. What we have to do is get away from this sense that there's a one-size-fits-all global agreement that can bring climate change under control. Actually, there are many, many different things that individual nations can implement, that bilateral agreements can pursue, that different sectors of industry and the economy can agree about. And they can do things to reduce the human influence on the climate system for reasons actually that are perhaps not primarily driven by climate change. They can be driven as much by improving public health or by improving energy security or energy efficiency. These are different motives for enacting policy, and they don't require 193 countries to agree to every dot and detail. And
Paul, do you really think that this will be a game changer in terms of ordinary people in society, that they should waken up now, that they should up the ante in how they're contributing towards the environment?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I agree with Mike completely that this report is a restatement of what we already knew, albeit with increasing levels of confidence. So to the extent that there's new science, there's no new message today. We're just more confident than we were 6 or 7 years ago. Quite what it will take to change public opinion on this, I really don't have any answers.
And not just public opinion, of course, but public behaviour. Tony's in Bollington. Hello, Tony.
Hi, how are you?
Well, are you prepared to change how you go about your life, Tony?
I'm green in the sense I don't accept the need to burn coal. Coal is too precious to burn to provide heat. There are many chemicals, there are many products that can be derived from coal. But the problem I have is the scientists themselves haven't covered themselves with glory in the last 10 years. There have been problems at East Anglia with data and so on. And they haven't been clever in the way they've played it. They've hidden data, or they haven't used data properly. So I have that skepticism. I'm not alone, but I'm green. But the issue is...
But you're sceptic about what? You don't believe in climate change, or you don't believe that humans are responsible for it?
Explain to me why the temperature hasn't moved in 15 years.
Paul?
You explain to me.
Well, Dr. Paul Williams will.
Right, let me try. I'll do my best.
And why historically have there been acute cold periods and hot periods? I do not comprehend.
Well, let me say this then. I mean, no climate scientist has ever said, and no scientific publication and no climate modelling group has ever suggested or predicted that every single decade will be warmer than the previous decade. And if you look at some of the climate simulations, it does happen sometimes that you get a decade that is not warmer or even is cooler than the decade before it. It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen with non-zero probability. And what that is telling us is that, you know, the global mean temperature is not determined uniquely by the CO2, but by other things. I mean, there are El Nino events, there are volcanic eruptions, the sun's output varies, and there's internal variability within the climate system, which has got to do with ocean currents, which can take heat and store it below the surface of the ocean where we can't see it.
But the difficulty over East Anglia data and the way it was handled was poor in terms of public PR, and it doesn't help the public. But let's get away from that. I accept your view. I have a different view. But what worries me is the UK. We always go out on a limb in taking initiatives politically. As I understand it, we contribute about 2%. China is the big polluter, and India and so on. And I understand why, because I know China quite intimately. And they have a need to create jobs for people. But if we're going to tackle the problem, we have to tackle the issue of dirty coal burning on a great scale, where one station is being opened every week in places like China and India. Well, we have to tackle that.
And Mike Hume, he's got a point, hasn't he? That you know, what is the point of people in this country changing their behaviour if China doesn't change theirs? What's the point? We're a drop in the ocean compared.
But that logic only applies if you frame the problem of climate change as a collective action problem, that there's nothing worth doing at all unless everybody moves together. And what my argument has been in recent years is we need to get away from that sort of thinking, that there's nothing worth doing unless we can get everybody on board. Actually, there are a whole load of things that are worth doing as implementing policy to increase the protection of valuable places and people against weather risks, of reducing the variety of pollutants that we put into the atmosphere that deteriorate the quality of our air and cause detriments to our public health. And in the longer run, we do need an energy technology transition away from oil, coal and gas, and that's not going to happen quickly, and it needs to happen through a large-scale innovation program. But don't let the whole thing get snarled up in that particular problem and think that you can somehow negotiate 193 countries together. Climate change in the end is not going to be solved in our lifetime or probably in our children's lifetime. What we have to do is we have to find smart ways of implementing policies that bring about a wider range of public benefits. And countries and individuals and sectors can move at different speeds to implement those policies.
Michael's in Exeter. You've got a question, Michael.
Hello, yes. I'm a sceptic, but I think all scientists from both sides of the argument agree that the atmosphere, we are putting too much pollutants into the air. But I'll put to these scientists who are saying we are to blame, in the last 15 years, global warming has actually stalled. Even it's not actually happened in the last 15 years. It's not gone anywhere, even though we are pumping more pollutants into the air. So I put to them, how can they explain that we're responsible?
Paul?
Well, it's simply this natural variability. So even if the CO2 in the atmosphere was constant, did not vary, the climate would still go up and down. It would get warmer for a few years and cooler. I mean, there are, El Nino events in the Pacific Ocean are a classic example of a natural climate oscillation. And what we're seeing now is the superposition, if you like, of this natural climate variability with the longer-term upward trend. And sometimes what that means is that it will stagnate for a few years, perhaps a decade. And there's nothing in climate science.
The only proof you have is you go by models. I mean, where's actual physical proof? You only do computer models that tell us that we're responsible. I would like to see some physical evidence, not some computer model, but you just can't provide us with evidence, can you?
Well, I mean, let me defend the models. I mean, the models are based on the laws of physics. There's not... You've sort of put physics at one side and the models on the other, but the models are the physics. The models are the representations of the physics. So all the science that we have built up over the centuries is embodied in those models. And in fact, you can trace back to the 1890s, the first paper that suggested that on physical principles that CO2 would cause a warming. So it's not new physics in any sense.
You're really getting a sense, Paul, of just, well, certainly coming through in the phones tonight, on the text, I'm getting a sense of the level of scepticism that there is around this, and part of the problem will be communicating with people in order to change their mind. That's a tough task.
But can I just use the example of our friend from Exeter, because he started off by actually saying that he and maybe many others agree that we're putting too many pollutants into the atmosphere. Part of the problem here is that so much of the discussion around climate change and what to do about climate change gets dragged into these discussions about how accurate is the science, how precise are the models, what exactly is the amount of warming that's going to happen in the next 10 years or the next 20 years. And that takes attention away from actually a much wider set of things that can be done with a wider set of agreements without being dragged into discussions about the science. So, for example, reducing the amount of pollutants that we put into the atmosphere by reducing black carbon and black soot, the aerosols that come out of smokestacks that burn coal, increasing the efficiency of our car engines, all of these things reduce our pollution, improve the quality of our air, reduce the burden on public health, and they may reduce human influence in the climate system. But the motive to doing it is not dependent on getting an agreement about exactly how accurate the models are.
Because the other reality is climate change could actually be beneficial to some of us, couldn't it? That you get less harsh winters for a start. We've got the ability to grow more crops in Britain, don't we?
Yeah, I mean, that's opening up a different question, that changes in climate have lots of different effects in different parts of the world, and it creates opportunities for new types of activities in some regions, just as much as it introduces new risks and dangers elsewhere. That's a very complicated story. But again, my point would simply be that around adaptation to weather risks, there's an awful lot that can be done to protect valuable assets and people and places from weather risks. And whether those weather extremes are caused by human activities, 90% or 40% or 20%, isn't really the issue. Surely we want to protect our valuable assets and people and places from weather risks, period. And that's a public good.
Paul, we'll pause there. Mike, we'll pause there. 0500 909 693. Are you prepared to do your bit, change your lifestyle to cut global warming? The text 85058, on Twitter at BBC5Live. Let's get the latest news now. It's 10:31.
On digital radio, digital TV, mobile and online.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live. On digital and online.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
Now, StephenNolan. Friday, Saturday and Sunday nights from 10. Call 0500 909 693. Calls are free from most landlines, but some networks and mobile operators will charge. Text 85058. Text will be charged at your standard message rate.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
So now that we've had this news that scientists are saying they are 95% sure that humans are responsible for climate change, what are you prepared to do? You prepared to change your lifestyle? You prepared to change the way you live? Let's ask Doug in Rugby. Hello, Doug.
Hello, how are you?
You're a former civil engineer, Doug.
Yes, I'm a civil structural engineer. That's what I used to do. Then I decided to see if I could help tackle the problems which this global warming, climate change, extreme weather is having on us all. So I spent the last 3.5 years of my life inventing new ways of doing things. Now we're in the process of. I've got various troops out there trying to get the message into government. I've got people around the world doing things.
What have you invented?
New ways of making energy. It's 30 times cheaper than wind turbines, at least 10 times cheaper than burning coal, 15 times cheaper than gas.
Yeah, but what is it you're doing? Spell it out for me.
You want to know? You want to know how you do it? Okay. You're in Manchester right now, aren't you?
Sorry?
Hello? You're in Manchester.
Yes, I'm in Manchester. Yes.
Yeah, okay. In Manchester, there's a skydiving wind tunnel there where they do the skydiving. Okay. It's a recirculating air wind tunnel. All right.
Yeah.
It's a ski slope in the same place. Well, I discovered if you put a wind turbine where they normally do the skydiving, okay, you actually make more power than you actually put into the fans in a recirculating air system. But you don't actually put one turbine rotor where the skydivers normally skydive. You put a series of them. Very much like the way a jet engine works, the way water goes through rapids. It's called secondary momentum flow theory.
Do you know what, Doug? I'm sure it'll be great. It'll be one of those inventions, but I haven't understood not one word you've said to me, and it's not your fault. I'm sure it's mine, but not one word have I understood of that. Alan in Blackburn, thanks for calling us, Doug. Alan, good evening.
Good evening, Stephen.
Is it up to us to change? Wake up, smell the coffee, look at this. Scientists saying it is us. It's you know, for as far as science goes, 95% is pretty much a sure thing that we're responsible for this.
Yeah, I can honestly say that in the 1960s, my hobbying was car rallies, you know, through the forests. And it was always up to your knees when the RAC rally were on in November, up to your knees in snow. Never failed. But never is now. It's all mud. But it's got to be, it really has to be a government or a pan-government initiative. We can all keep our electrical things not on standby but switch them off. But for the big ticket items, it's just got to be government, and government, as I mean by the Labour, Conservative, Liberal in this country, getting their heads together and agreeing a long-term strategy.
Well, and agreeing a long-term strategy, Mike Hume, that'll be difficult in itself, getting cross-party support for that, won't it?
No,
Mike Hume?
Because all their people who they've asked to do these things are telling them that has got to be done.
Alan, thank you. Mike?
Well, I mean, in the UK, we've tried this with the Climate Change Act and the Climate Change Committee, which had cross-party support and has set out various emission reduction targets for the UK over the next 5, 10, 25 years. But if again, I come back to my point, if you think the problem in the end is to try to get a collective deal to reduce these emissions by a certain amount by a certain time, then you're doomed for failure, I'm afraid. You know, and the UK certainly, even if it met all of its own emissions reduction targets, isn't going to make much dent in those global emissions. However, if you reframe what the problem of climate change is around these different ideas that I've been suggesting, it's about reducing the impacts of extreme weather. It's about reducing the variety of pollutants that deteriorate our quality of air. And it's about innovating a long-term energy transition to renewable and more secure sources of energy. Then you can make progress on those smaller, more tractable goals without having to wait for 193 countries to agree. And that is what we would call climate pragmatism. It's not going to solve climate change. It's not going to guarantee that you can stop it happening, but it will bring about a wider range of public benefits more rapidly, more quickly, than waiting for the elusive global deal.
Paul?
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that, really, except that I agree with it. And, I mean, I think, you know, my expertise is really in the science, and I've got no academic credibility in the policy side of things, so I try just to stick to the science.
But in terms of the science, Paul, just sum up for us, once again, for those people listening to this who are still sceptics, who are still thinking that this will not affect their lives in the future. Tell them what the science spells out.
Well, perhaps I'll give a case study then. So we call it global warming, and of course there is warming, but often it's the knock-on consequences of the warming that we might experience more fully than the warming itself. I mean, we've talked about sea level rise. Let's think about the Thames Barrier, which was designed to withstand breaches, except once in every 1,000 years. So it was designed so that flooding would breach it once every 1,000 years. Now, we've heard today about sea level rise of perhaps 80 centimetres, and what the research is showing is that for a sea level rise of a bit less than that, of 50 centimetres, it would be breached once every 100 years. So not once every 1,000, but 10 times more often than that. And for an extra 50 centimetres on top of the first 50, so to take it to 1 metre, it would be breached once every decade. So these are the sorts of things that I think are just as concerning as the temperature increases itself.
Okay. Paul, thank you very much indeed. Mike, thank you. If you are picking up the phone tonight, 0500 909 693. Andy in Cheshire says, Stephen, I've started cycling to work. I make my own cat litter out of my paper waste. It's about lots of people doing little small things, says Andy. Bob in Somerset, if we want to change global warming, we have to get everyone to do something, not just the government. On the text 85058 at BBC5Live on Twitter tonight.